All right, let's get into this. So last video we talked about what kind of an issue climate change was, and we discussed a variety of issues. Um, Now we're going to discuss a couple more. We're going to keep discussing severe weather and health, but this video will talk about national security predominantly. We'll discuss the rest of these in another video. Fire. If you're anywhere in the West Coast, you are aware this year of fire. The air quality index is something that we've all had to get to become acquainted with. There have been days where standing outside, you literally start getting, your eyes start getting irritated, you start feeling it. It can't be good for your lungs. And as you're breathing in the fire, you realize most of it is tree and wood, yes, but some of it are people's homes. Entire towns get wiped off the map. And these fires can strike anywhere, of course. They tend to strike in areas that are close to brush and in areas that are dry. California has periods where it rains a lot, and then it gets periods where it gets very, very dry. And by sheer confluence, some of those periods can be terrible and terrifying for the people living through them. Rich and poor people alike suffer from this, although a lot of people in the suburbs tend to suffer the most, and those are usually people that only have one house to live in. And you can lose your entire possessions very quickly. A lot of people live in places that are uninsurable for fire damage. It's brutal. Some of these fires can go at rates of 60 or 70 miles per hour. The campfire, for example, was spreading at a rate of a football field every 3 seconds. When people got the warning to leave, some of them had 10 or 15 minutes to get all of their possessions and get on the road. There were cars whose tires melted onto the road, right? Like it was terrifying, and it is terrifying. Lots of people have died in these events. And it's not just you. It is getting worse. It's getting much, much worse. Sorry, there's a slide missing. There are 1,200 active wildfires in the United States right now. 5 of the worst wildfires in California history have happened in the past couple of months, burning through approximately 45% of the damage done from the 20 worst wildfires. And that's the United States. There are other places. In the Amazon, over the past couple of years, there's been more and more wildfires. Some of these might be natural. They have increased in severity and scope, especially since President Jair Bolsonaro took over. But some people think that they may actually be man-made. It so happens that in the past couple of years, President Trump declared a tax, a tariff on Chinese purchases of soy from Midwest farmers. And they, instead of negotiating, instead of paying more, decided to buy their soy from other countries. And to find other countries, they had to shop around. The president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, negotiated a deal where Brazil would provide the soy. It just so happened that they had to raise lots of the Amazon to do so. Amazon some people have described it as the lungs of the planet. But even that's not the worst. at the beginning of 2020, should have been a warning to us all. The Australian wildfires burned an area the size of Virginia in Australia, but spread across an area the size of the United States. Millions and millions of acres. We might be surpassing that in the United States this year. So that seems bad, and that doesn't seem great. And it can do long-term damage to health, to our health. I said in the last video that we were going to talk about health some more. We've talked about food security, and I've mentioned disasters and infectious diseases. The next video, I'll talk more about water quality. But sometimes just the heat from global warming by itself can be damaging to health. Everything from heat cramps to heat stroke. When I was a child, maybe a couple of dozen people died in the Southwest from heat stroke every year. Now it's in the hundreds. But because it happens in the background, people don't pay attention to it, and it fades as less and less important. It's just the way life is now. What happens with climate change is a twofold phenomenon of increasing the average temperature and increasing the variance in temperature. Both happen because the Earth gets warmer. So as it gets warmer, there's more hot days, but there's still the range from before. So the increased temperature just means that there's more and more hotter days. I have on the syllabus color-coded years, and I've shown you the spirals of temperature. The better way of thinking about this year as being hotter than average, and it is, I mean, it's going to be probably the second hottest year since we started taking records. The past 5 years have been the 5 hottest years. The 5 hottest years were also the 5 previous hottest years. 20 out of the past, or sorry, 19 out of the past 20 years have been among the hottest years, and the only year that was hotter in record was 1998, which was pretty darn hot itself. It was an El Nino year. So there's going to be hotter days, and the way to think about this isn't that we are living in one of the hotter days of the previous century. It's that this is one of the hotter days, or the hot weeks, or hotter months, or years of the next, or sorry, this is one of the cooler days, weeks, or months of the next century. I'll say that again. It's not that this is one of the hotter years of the previous century. It's going to be one of the cooler years of the next. It can be particularly bad if you live in urban areas. It can be particularly bad if you're poor or elderly or a child, if you have medications or pre-existing conditions. In the previous class, we talked about homeless people living alone and lack of social ties. Also people that just spend a lot of time outside or drink a lot of alcohol and other diuretics. Things to watch out for. But it's not just fires, it's not just heat that can harm us. It turns out that there's actually other risks associated with it, with how people will act. So I don't know if you've ever been caught in traffic during the summer or caught in traffic during the winter, but in the same amount of traffic, you will get angrier during the summer. When it is hotter out, people get angrier. There is increase in property and violent crimes. There's intergroup conflict. And this is associated with all of the things that we expect climate change to bring. It's essentially linear. You can zoom in, so this is a little bit difficult to read. If you take a band from the equator, north and south, that's the green, and so those are the green charts. The risk of invasion, of land invasion, increases as there's more variance in rainfall. The number of violent events increases as well. If you look at A, which is zoomed into a certain portion of Africa, the hotter something is, the more risk there is of conflict, of civil wars, of leaders exiting. Of intergroup riots, of any conflict. There's a direct ratio of just heat and weather events with violence. And this is especially true in areas that have low water availability or low resource availability. So control of water resources tends to become important. It tends to become a military target tool and a political tool. And people fight back and forth over it. A lot of you live in the Southwest, in Nevada in particular. Nevada's water rights are modeled after our oil rights, which means poorly. There's incentive to take out all of the water from the ground. And it so happens that we've over-allocated all of the water. There's not enough water in the ground to account for everybody that has the water rights that they have. So there's risks all around the world with increased heat, of increased violence, of heat stroke and heat syncope and those related issues that are directly related, of wildfires that can burn things down. But the increased risk of violence also causes increased risk of downfalls of certain states. So as the environment gets more scarce, and this could come because of a variety of supply issues, demand issues, or structural issues. Structural issues being that perhaps some groups get less than others. Increased scarcity leads to either migration, expulsion, or decreased productivity, which might lead to migration and expulsion anyway. All of this weakens states. You don't want to be in a country or a state where everybody is fleeing. Usually you want to be the country where everybody wants to go to it. You see increased ethnic conflicts, overthrowing of governments, and deprivation conflicts as states get weaker. Climate security is security. People describe climate change as a threat multiplier. Natural disasters, environmental degradation, competition for resources, like all of these things have happened in the past and we know what happens. And if the climate continues to get hotter and more volatile, you expect the things that have happened in situations where climate has been volatile before to continue happening, perhaps at an increased rate. So there will be increased disputes over trade routes, zone, and resources. Environmentalists aren't saying that. Like, this is every nation on the planet, with the exception of the United States. Every nation, like not even every major nation, literally every nation accepts climate change and thinks of it as a security risk. Every military organization, every intelligence organization, in fact, all of the United States' intelligence agencies think about climate change as a security risk, as a threat to our national security. The non-governmental organizations agree. There's something called the Fragile State Index, which tries to quantify some of these worries. The idea being that there are countries that are more or less able to withstand environmental perturbation. So the bluer a country is, the more likely it would be willing to take a major war or natural disaster or economic disaster and still maintain roughly its power structure, its setup. The closer to red it is, the more likely it is to fall apart if pressed in the right ways. If you look into the Middle East, you'll see Syria is bright red, and it's surrounded by countries that aren't in the blue or green zone, but they're not as bad as Syria is. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The United States is green. Over the past 10 years, we've been keeping track of which countries have improved on this Fragile State Index, and I'll go into detail about what the Fragile State Index measures soon. Basic idea is that fragile states are the ones that are more sensitive. So some countries have gotten worse, the United States and Brazil. Venezuela has gotten much, much worse. Several countries in Africa and in the Middle East. So the United States ranks 145th in terms of its fragile state index. It's changed 3 points from the mid-30s to the high 30s on this point in the past 10 years. And you can zoom into what the fragile state index measures. So the issues where the United States has gotten significantly worse over the past decade or so has been an increased security apparatus, the rise of factionalized elites, and widespread vengeance-seeking group grievances. We talked about Proud Boys in the past lecture. There are other groups that feel aggrieved in this country, and those have been increasing. Economic indicators are a bit mixed. The economy is doing, or was doing, very well for a while. We'll see what happens at the end of this pandemic. Political indicators are also mixed, right? So delegitimizing the state has wavered. Deterioration of public services, suspension of human rights abuses. This is measured as increasing recently, but having been broadly decreasing since the middle of the Iraq War. Luckily, social cross-cutting has declined, right? So mounting demographic pressures and displaced refugees, we've actually accepted very few refugees. And very few people have left the United States as refugees. We're experiencing some demographic pressures, which I'll talk about in a future discussion. But it's not if the United States is doing good, right? Like the thing about fragile states is it's just as bad as if they're your neighbor as if it's you. Canada's doing good. Canada's actually been improving since Trudeau was elected in 2015. And it's improving in most of the areas, although not with in the security apparatus. Mexico has also been doing better since the election of Andrés Manuel López Obrador. The possible exception, again, is the security apparatus. But Mexico's baseline is nearly twice as high as the United States is, right? So we were ranked, we had a 38 in our fragile state score. Mexico's 67. It's ranked 98th most fragile state. Could be worse. Could be a lot worse. Could be 97 units worse. The United States, I feel like I've shown this. This was the previous slide. Yes. So as risk factors increase, as there's more migration, demographic inequities, gender inequalities, youth unemployment, lootable resources, these are things that can be taken that aren't attached to the ground in some way. That, all of those goodies give either the rise of actors or people wishing to take out, to act on you as a nation. So if fragile nations start appearing in this hemisphere, and Venezuela is pretty fragile right now, and has been recently, you see more and more conflict spilling over elsewhere. Impacts aren't local. We know this, and like you know this from the California wildfires, right? Like it wasn't the Reno wildfire, and yet we breathed it in. This is true for conflict. It's true for disease. It's true for pollution, for dust, for eliminating wildlife, for anything, even competition. So thinking about climate change as a global problem is essential. I mean, you can think about it as a personal issue, as a societal issue, as a governmental or industrial issue, but it is at least also a global issue. It's a foreign policy issue. And the reason I know this, and I talked about it in class last week, is something that followed from a series of droughts in the early 2000s, from 2006 to 2015 or so. There was a phenomenon in internet circles they attributed to the rise of social media, but there was just like a lot of conflict. There's a lot of climate stresses and a lot of unprepared governments that led to a lot of uprisings all across Northern Africa and the Middle East. And these were partially due to some mismanagement, partially due to bad geography. In the United States, we overlook how great our geography is. We're just very, very lucky, and have been extremely lucky throughout. So as we grow more people, have more people, and graze the land more, there's more demand. The water gets degraded, and there's more. The land gets more degraded, and there's more water insecurity. And this is when I wanted to zoom into Syria, which I think is going to be illustrative of what I'm talking about. So Syria is a country in the Middle East. It was a middle-income developing country. It was roughly the same poverty line as the United States. About 10% of the population were refugees from largely the Iraq War and other regional wars. But there was a repressive government, and there was some bad climate. 22 million people, lots of them subsistence farmers, went through several bad seasons in a row, and then one season with basically total crop loss. Farmers had to sell everything. People ended up moving into the cities. Millions of people moved into the cities, and then terrorist groups moved in. The government attacked the people that were protesting it. Some people joined these terrorist groups, and then it became sort of an all-out fight. And a lot of the people that were involved attempted to flee. People had been fleeing for a while. this has been a region that has been destabilized since early, well, for most of its history, let's be honest. But in the past couple of decades especially. Um, and a lot of people who weren't dying decided that they wanted to flee. And they started leaving the country, um, heading to Europe, Turkey, anywhere that would have them. Hundreds of thousands of refugees at a time, millions now. Lots of them were children fleeing, trying to find a way to escape the violence. Um, and as I said in the class, um, there is a connection between increased refugees seeking asylum and countries responding with wanting to shut down their borders and electing populist nationalist leaders. The big lesson is something like this. Climate change increases volatility. The underlying issues in a country come out during increased volatility. In the United States, it's going to be racial or class-based. It might be perhaps regional. Other countries might have caste-based, they might have religious divisions, they might have divisions I haven't even thought of. But the underlying communities band together and separate themselves as resources get scarce and volatility increases. Governments are put in hard positions and they're asked to make tough choices, and some of them make bad choices, and it leads to conflict. And this will happen more and more, and this will have international effects, right? Like, it doesn't need to happen in Reno for it to affect Reno. I'll wrap up with this. Jared Diamond wrote a book called Collapse, where he analyzed societies that had historically collapsed, fallen. He starts with this idea, this prompt of there's some islands that were completely deforested historically, and everybody died. And you think about the person who cuts down that last tree and what they're thinking about it. But the problem is that the person that cut down that last tree had no other choice. They were locked in that trajectory well before that tree was the final tree. And so Diamond identifies certain issues that he thinks led to a lot of these collapses. Deforestation, soil problems like erosion, water management problems, overhunting, overfishing, invasive species, overpopulation, and increased per capita impact of people. Essentially, just either more people, lower supply, or less well-structured societies. Below the green line here, I have things that Diamond thinks are new to our global society. These are new risks of possible future collapse. Human-caused climate change, buildup of toxins in the environment, energy shortage, and a full human use of Earth's photosynthetic capacity. I'm not sure I agree with one or two of these, but you know, the point is that there are risk factors, and a lot of these are known risk factors. Military agencies and intelligence agencies around the world are aware of this. So Diamond was once asked what the single most important problem facing the world today was. And in the context of this book, he says, that's the worst possible question. If you dodge 11 bullets, but 12 were fired at your head, you still die. If you solve 11 problems, but not the 12th, we're still in trouble. You have to solve them all. The task ahead for this generation and the next is possibly the hardest task that humanity has ever had to face. And it's possible that climate change will make it harder and harder for humans to band together to solve these issues. It's possible that it'll just reveal the worst of humanity, and people will follow this positive feedback loop to the logical conclusion of the end of civilization, or at least the end of civilization as we know it. Um, we faced end of civilization problems before, but never globally. So um, I don't know what advice to give here, and maybe that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to tell you that um, things are scary. And I think that as long as the facts are what they are on the ground, and there's no new technologies, no new approaches, no new political movements, the future looks bleak. But there's lots of new political movements, lots of new technologies, lots of new possibilities that we haven't even thought of. And maybe you will, or maybe somebody will, and you'll be able to do something about it. All right. I hope you have a good week.